DOTE.
So welcome to a basic tutorial on how to use DOTE to transcribe. So we're just going to try and show the absolute basics of getting started with the transcript and to show the type of model that we support. And we're going to try and reproduce the first lines here in the Lego demo X transcript and do it from scratch and see how we get along. So there's a number of little features we'll be using, and there are videos that explain these in much more detail. So let's get started. First what we're going to do is create a new project. So we'll say a new project, and we'll just call this Lego, and we'll leave it as transcript name main, and then we'll put it in the same place as we have the current DOTE projects. So if I create that, we'll get a nice blank ready to go for adding media and starting to transcribe. So if we go to Media Manager, what we're going to do is add a file. We're going to choose two videos. We'll choose one main one, this Insta360 Pro. So I'll just select that. It will import it into the project. And then we'll add another one, which will be a camera on the table, this Yi360 here. And it's just importing that one. And first of all, we'll just leave one of them active, and we're going to work on that Insta360 Pro and maybe see why we want to have a look at the other one to get a better fix on what's going on. So let's just close that. And there we see the video. And we should see a waveform being generated. There we are. So we have our video, just one video. It turns out it's a 360 camera, so it starts off in this view with a DOTE projection, and we can use the mouse to move around, zoom in and out using the either a right click and moving in and out, moving up and down with the mouse, or using the scroll wheel. And then if we just grab in with the left click or a plain click, then we can just move around. So we're going to focus on this person here who's instructing how to do the game that they're playing, and then this group here. So maybe that's a nice shot to start with. We'll just leave it there looking at this group, and it's currently saving this state, so when we open it, it will actually show only this view. And we have a waveform for the whole of the video. It's 3 minutes 43 seconds long roughly, and we have no transcript yet. So what we should do first is just to check at the settings. If we look at the settings, we should just see, okay, what have we set up for when things are backed up, what sort of size of font we're going to use, what's the width of the name column where we have speaker ID or participant ID. Are we going to put a margin? Yes, we do have a margin line here at 70 characters. We could change that if we wish. Is it a 2D default? And if we tend to use 2D videos rather than 360, so you could set it to that. What sort of projection do we prefer? And there are 3 projections. And Jeffersonian, it's not Mondadian we're going to do. We're going to do a Jeffersonian basic transcript. We don't need to worry about these symbols. We're not going to change any of the shortcuts. And we have the FFmpeg installed in case the waveform or the video didn't play or the waveform didn't appear. And if not, then we could have downloaded that if it wasn't present. So that's fine. And we could then also look at options, transcript options. And we see where it's stored. We can open that directory. We can also change the default font size for this particular transcript, or the width of the name column. We could change the margin just for this transcript, different from the default for all transcripts. Change the conventions for this one particularly. We could have Mondadian if we wished. And we could add a translation subtier. And we're going to do that. So I'm going to type ENG for short for English as a standard 3-letter convention and add that. And now we're automatically going to get an English translation subtier every time we type a speaker name once we get started. We're not going to have a gloss, we'll now have no other subtiers. So I'll close that. Now we're ready to go. So we've set it up with the type of style that we want, the conventions we want. And what we need to do now is maybe we're going to zoom in. So it's going to zoom in and play. You can see we've got a big chunk of stuff going on here. We might want to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, go.
And now we're hearing this person talk. So I'm just going to go back. We can use Control J, for example, goes back 1 second. This is the very beginning. And we're at 0, 0. We could put some metadata just to get started, and if you do // and it goes blue, then you can do metadata. So we're just going to call it metadata. In this case, maybe what we'll just do is say who the participants are. We're probably going to call them R1 will be this guy here, and then the woman at the back here, and then the woman nearest us and the woman here we'll call P1, P2, P3, just to fit. So I'm just going to put comma P1, P2, P3, just to remind ourselves. And that's the metadata. And you can do anything here in the metadata, and that's recognized as just, it's a convenient way for us at the moment just to put metadata inside the transcript. And now we could get started with the transcript. So the first speaker is going to be R1, yeah, the researcher here. And what you always have to do is put a colon and then a tab. That's all you have to do is speaker name, colon, tab. If you always do that, or speaker name, .eng for the translation line, colon, tab, then the tab we've set it currently at 10 characters, I think it was. We can change that if we wish. Then that's going to make things much easier for DOTE to recognize and parse your transcript and publish it in the formats, other sorts of formats. So this is purely for working inside DOTE with the transcript. The publish format you can change, maybe put spaces in here instead, put line numbers. So if we just play what he's going to say. So there's the first bit. It starts about here. Okay, so we can move around with the mouse and click inside the waveform. We can zoom it in and out if we want to have a little bit more detail, for example. So we're looking at this part just here. You can use the controls here, but maybe it's preferable to use shortcuts. And one thing you can do is, rather than just playing, is you can play return and shift, control or command and space in Windows and N in Mac. Does the return, so I'll just play that now to show you. So you can replay. You can also do a selection if you press shift and drag. You can say I only want to hear that, and it will repeat that. You can also do that with shortcuts as well, which I'll be doing every now and again, just to show you. So that's the repeat. Otherwise it carries on. So we're roughly about here. So he's saying try in Danish, or so. Oops, wrong one. Yeah. And maybe we're just going to write the words first of all. So let's just play that. And then he's saying we're not going to worry about pausing. Not yet. And then in more colloquial Danish. Go. And you can just use the shortcuts while you're typing, and then he's going to say so getting the right keys here, so starter V. So we'll just leave it like that. Then we've got the basic words to get started, and maybe we need a translation subtier. We haven't got it first of all because we've never used any participants, so if I now just click, I'm going to get some auto-completion going on here, and I want to have a subtier with a translation, and roughly in English that would be 3, and then when I say go, then we start. That would be a rough translation. And there, so we have our first speaker, and it's up to this point here. Now we might want to put in some sync codes, because we'd like to be able to jump backwards and forwards and sync everything together. So if I go back to the beginning, it's roughly around here. If I just click here, or I press Control M, Command M, then I'll get a sync code that's now attached. And the next part, that's the next part here. That's going to be roughly down here. So let's just put that in now. R1 continues. Let's just put R1. Now we get the translation, and if I press Control M, we get a sync code. So now we're beginning to parse the waveform so that we can jump around quickly between different parts of the transcript. Very standard thing to do on other software as well. and we just have shortcuts to facilitate that. And these can be moved. You can drag them, drop them like this, and you can move these around here by picking them up and dragging them to be exactly where you would like. But there's a sort of a short pause in there, so we might want to add that. Let's just first add what he says. So, are you clear? Er du klar? Klar? So I'm just going to add that now. Klar? And maybe we have a intonation contour there. We'll just add a question mark. Sorry, I put we. Klar? And are you ready? And a question mark. So we've got the translation, we've got the main tier, and maybe we want to see about that pause. Just about, is it about here? So we could use a shift and then drag and then get an idea of the length of that. And if you look down here, it says 0.4 seconds. Let's just try again, 0 up to here, 0.4. Let's just play. Maybe we could say, yeah, so it's about 0.5. So what I'll do, I'm just going to put in a new line and then a tab, and then I'm going to add, and immediately we get the brackets we need, and it's in a different color. It's recognized as a pause, in a timed interval marking, 0.5. And why not also put that roughly about there, and then we can add a sync code as long as we're on the right line here. There we've got a sync code, and then if we click on one of these sync codes and then shift and click on the other, it says about 0.4. We could drag that a little to about here and then do it again, 0.5. So that's roughly about right, and we could zoom in if we wanted to get that precise. There's a little glitch just there. I don't think it's part of the speech, but maybe it could be the end of what he's saying, "Are klar," but I doubt that. It's a fairly noisy environment. So now we've got started, we've got some sync codes, and are you ready? We're looking only at one camera. We can carry on now. Maybe we hear somebody else, but we might need another camera to hear what they say. So this is where we could maybe use a video cue, or we could switch to a different camera. There's a camera on the table here. She actually has a wireless mic, but we haven't loaded that one into this project. So if I play, I need to deselect. I can deselect from here, for example, or using a shortcut. She says something around here. But they're also speaking in another group, so you hear a bit of laughter. And in fact, on her wireless mic, we can hear that much better what she's saying to another member in her group. So let's just say we're not quite sure what that is at this point. Possibly there's a pause in here, so we could just maybe mark that like this just for now. We're not sure what it is. And then it's, in fact, this is P2. So P2, we've never used that person, so there isn't an autocomplete yet. And P2 says possibly something which we're not quite sure. We'll just leave it in brackets like that, so at the moment. And then we want a translation, so we can pick that up there. We're not sure what the translation is yet. And that's roughly starting about here, so I'll just add a sync code there. And if we play, and then about here, he's going to say something else. So now we want to have our one again, and we want the translation subtier auto-completed. And he says,
3, 2, 1, go.
So 3, 2, 1, go. Let's just write that down. 2, 1, go. And in a dialect form, and then in the translation subtier, 3, 2, 1, go. So this is very rough, first time through. And obviously with transcription, we're going to go through many times, adding and checking and adding more features, and maybe asking other people to listen in and correcting. And then she starts running. So let's play that.
3, 2, 1, go.
So about there, she's going to run about here. There she's going. So we maybe want to add a comment after that. In double brackets, we'll say P2 runs. So we've got a comment marked in a different color as well. And if we're using Mandarin, we'd want to obviously add a lot more detail and subtiers to deal with the actions that are going on. And that's what happens in the Mondaden example in the demo project. So now we've reconstructed part of it in a very, very simple way. We might want to add a subtier there for the 3, 2, 1 go, or roughly about there. So we'll add another sync code, there. And then P2 runs is roughly, we could say it's about here. Let's say she's running. So let's say we want to actually maybe try and hear what's going on at this point here when she's saying something. So what we can do is go to Media Manager, and we can say we want to listen and watch the camera on the table. So I've just added that now. We could open up a secondary video, which we can look at the same one and zoom in, but maybe that's not going to help us, and the sound isn't going to help. What we can do then is just pick up another camera, and here we are on the table, and zoom in, and maybe try and get what's going on between these two. And maybe what we'll do is audio source will say we only want to hear and we only want to see the waveform, and now we have a waveform for this one of what's going on the table from this camera's point of view. So now we're going to play. We're at the right point here. We're going to play. So she's definitely saying something. Maybe not quite sure, but if we could hear that and clarify, it could be something about being competitive. I mean, if she's saying, hey, I'm really competitive, I want to win this game. And we could fill that out. But you see, now we have a possibility with the 2 different cameras and 2 different audio tracks to be able to figure out. And we might want to make that something permanent, that we want to help us to fix that. We want to see a general view at the beginning, but roughly about this point. And we're going to now use the video cues. We're going to add a video cue to switch automatically. I'll just get rid of that one. Switch automatically to the other camera. So I'm going to turn on video cues here. This is video cues. And roughly about this point, what we're going to do is add a video cue. And I'm just going to zoom in on the video cue waveform. Let's play a little. We're roughly about here. And we'll turn on also track. And this will track then and show us where we are in relation to the sync codes. It's off by default because maybe if you don't use sync codes, you don't want it on. So it's maybe about here. We'll add a video cue to switch to another camera. So what you do is you say, yep, we want at this point to turn this camera on only. Not a smooth transition because it's a jump cut, and we'll save that. And there we get the other view. And then what we can do is just move it so we can see those two and him at the same time. And now what happens if I go back to the beginning? Actually, we have to set up also here a basic shot, so we're going to add one here with this view of the Insta360, because whichever the first one is sets it up for beforehand. So for this one we want to have this shot here, and we want to zoom in and just have a general view of them there. That's now set up, so can push that right to the beginning. So well, I'll have to do it again in setting up the view here because I hadn't saved that view. So I'm just going to now right click here and set the camera view to that view. Now we've set up the very first cue of what to look at, and as we play, it's coming up, and then it switches. Okay, it's not quite the right view. We want to do it here. If I right click on the video cue, I want to set the camera view. Now it will be correct. So there we go. So you can see we have a jump cut around the time she's going to speak, so we can get better an idea of what she's saying. So we'll see that again. So there she says something about being competitive. She doesn't respond, it's just a smile, she's laughing, and then she's about to run now. We'll see her running.
2, 1, go.
And there we might want to switch back, add a video cue to switch back to another camera, and then the camera behind the table, as we do in the final transcript that's in the demo project. Okay, so we've got autocomplete working now. So if we carried on and it was say another speaker, P2, said something again, then we could say yes, and then we'd get autocomplete. If it was P3 said something, we first have to add it the first time, and then after that P3 will have an autocomplete, as you see here, and so it's learning basically as you go along. As you add new speakers, it starts to assemble those as possibilities, and all you have to do is Ctrl+Enter, and then you'll see we already have P1, P2 and R1, and then we have a bunch. We could have a gloss, we could have action if we were doing mondada, and we could also add a figure if we were doing a mondada in conventions. So it's going to try and help you to autocomplete, as it will do, for example, auto-completing brackets, double brackets, and also, for example, let's say we wanted to say here, something in here was a bit softer. Then if we just type S, you'll see, well, do you want soft, slow, or a 0.1 second symbol for a special reason? Soft, and there you get the symbols necessary, whatever was being said softly. And we could just add in some spaces there to say this. It was said a bit softer in there when she actually says that. So you can see it's quite soft, but it gets picked up on her wireless mic that she's wearing. Okay, that's autocomplete around speaker IDs. Also, if you just press Ctrl+Enter anywhere, for example here, you'll see there's a bunch of autocompletions that you can choose, and those get more sophisticated with the Mondadian conventions, adding more things to do with alignment symbols. And I think that's about the basics you can see of getting started. What we would do now is go back and then go through again. Maybe we missed something, maybe we need to add a few more pauses, micro pauses in here, maybe some stress gets added, some loudness, and then we might want to add a bit more about what's happening in the scene within the restrictions of the Jeffersonian system. And if we wanted to do a Mondadan system, then we'd have to start working out what sorts of subtiers we'd want to add and adding them here with the symbols that are assigned to those subtiers. But that's a more advanced tutorial about starting up a Mondadan transcript, and we'll do one of those in the future. This is just about getting started with an absolutely basic transcript. And the final thing to show would be what happens if we want to export this. So if I export to RTF, I'm in the DOTE Pro version here, and the DOTE Pro has the possibility to go beyond just having all lines numbered and without any formatting or style changes. And this is what it looks like. We might need to add a bit more of a tab here to stop the, so now we've got everything fitting in. We could change the font size to be a little bit larger so we can see it a bit better. This is the preview of what it will look like when you import it into a Word document. We could add convert tabs to spaces, so there will be spaces here and not a tab, or we could leave it as it is. Depends on your preference and word processor or publisher. We don't want to have the technical comments in this case, and we could choose which lines to export, etc. But let's say we do want to have some more better line numbering. Let's say only primary lines, as you can see, and let's have no subtiers, so the translation will be without a subtier marking, and maybe a nice italicize and bold to make them stand out. And there we have the line numbers. Maybe we could take it off on comments so the line number disappears unless you want to have a line number, but the translation lines do not have line numbers. So and in fact if we move to this one, you'll see it and it now has only consecutive lines. If there was no pause here, then this one wouldn't be, number 3 wouldn't be numbered because it would be consecutive. So that shows you we can do the basics, have it laid out in a DOTE style, and then export it exactly so that there's no trace of the DOTE editing. The DOTE editing of layout is because it makes it much easier for us to build a parser that can figure out what the transcript is doing and correct it or show errors or problems. For example, if I now delete this, you'll see, hey, there's some sort of error here, missing closing symbol. This equally be true here. Yep, there's some missing symbol here, and it could be a bracket here. So there's all sorts of errors will be shown, and with overlaps, and also doing realignments of overlaps. So if you have an overlapping and then you edit it, then you can just ask DOTE to realign it all, so the overlapping brackets are all lined up vertically. And that will work for Mondadan system as well. So that's hopefully a basic introduction to getting started with a transcript. I should have, of course, been saving at this point, and I haven't saved this yet, but there's very likely to be a backup. If I look in the backups, you'll see here there's a list of backups about changes that were made. In the DOTE Pro version, you can see here the changes being marked, differences between this version and an earlier one. And I could also go to the checkpoints and see, okay, this is all the changes, but I haven't made a checkpoint. I could make a checkpoint here. If you have Git installed, then you can do that. Please see the tutorials and the help guide about doing that. And if you have the Pro version, you can see differences. Otherwise, you just see the current version that's being peeked at, rather than the difference between that one and the one prior. And so I can make a checkpoint here, for example, added lines 1 to 15. So I got started, and now we have a checkpoint that shows that difference to the initial transcript, which was in fact blank. So you can see nothing was done in the initial, it was a brand new one, and now we have the new one. And now if I made some new changes, then those would be shown as different from this current version of the transcript. So you can see there's some record and backup that I can manually work on, and is done automatically with the auto backups, that allows us to keep track of the transcript as it's evolving, and looking for why certain changes were made in the past. Okay, we've been through a lot. There are a lot of video tutorials to help you, and there's a lot in the L9 help guide. So please look at all of the resources there in order to figure out some of the things I was saying and demoing really quickly. So hopefully that's given you some ideas about how to get started transcribing using DOTE.